Hello, everyone, and welcome back. If you were here with us last week for the first part of this webinar series, or if you're joining us for the first time today, part 2 of this educational program is titled From Bottles to First Foods and More, Adventures in Solid Food Introduction with PKU Explore. This is brought to you by VIA, VitaFlow in association with you. I'm Elisabetta Johnson, registered dietitian and part of medical affairs here at VitaFlow North America. I'm joined by my colleague, Maria Ortego, also a dietitian and marketing manager at VitaFlow North America. We're really excited to be your hosts today for today's session. Financial support for this presentation was provided by VitaFlow USA, a Nestle Health Science company. The views expressed herein are those of the presenter and do not necessarily represent Nestle's views. The material is accurate as of the date it was presented and is for educational purposes only. It is not intended as a substitute for medical advice. This program is not eligible for CPEU. Just a few quick notes before we get going into the main portion of today's session. You will receive the slide handouts in a subsequent email after the broadcast, and we will also have a live Q&A at the end of this session. However, you will see on the bottom corner or center of the pane that you have a Q&A button. And if you have any question as the presentation is happening, please feel free to type those in as they come. This way we can streamline the process at the end and hopefully have time to get to all of your questions. Now it's time to meet our speakers. And today our main speaker is Chanel Suarez, a senior metabolic dietitian at UCLA in Los Angeles, California, with 7 years of clinical experience. We're also joined again by Suzanne Hollander, our speaker from last week's session, who will participate in our Q&A at the end. So welcome to both of our speakers.
Thank you so much, Elisabetta, for the introduction. And thank you so much to VitaFlow for inviting me to speak today on a topic that I am personally very passionate about. So let's go ahead and get started with just taking a glance at the what, the why, and when of solid food introduction. So the primary goal of solid food introduction is to progressively transition from an exclusively liquid diet from either breast milk or infant formula, or sometimes a combination of the two, to a varied diet that incorporates solid foods. And why is this important? Well, first of all, solid foods provide nutrients that are required to meet nutritional and developmental needs when breast milk or infant formula can no longer meet those nutritional needs alone. Additionally, solid food introduction helps develop oromotor and self-feeding skills, and it really allows infants to engage with their families and caregivers at meal times to really learn their family's eating habits, their customs, and their traditions surrounding food. We typically get started with solid food introduction at around 6 months of age, and this is aligned with the recommendations from both the American Academy of Pediatrics and also the World Health Organization. Let's take a look now at the approximate nutrient intake during the introduction of solids in infants at about 6 months of age. So first, taking a look at an infant without PKU. At around 6 months, on average, they need about 17 grams of total protein to meet their needs. They will typically get about 6 to 7 grams of protein from breast milk and or standard infant formula, which is approximately 500 mLs of liquid volume. They'll then get about 10 grams of protein from a varied diet with the introduction of solid foods. Now, looking at an infant with PKU, at 6 months of age, their total protein needs are estimated to be higher, so at about 22 grams of total protein a day estimated. In terms of liquid intake, they're typically getting small amounts of fee from prescribed amounts of breast milk and or standard infant formula. They're also getting fee-free infant formula and about 4 grams of protein from solid food introduction. Now, if fee-free infant formula is provided in volumes similar to liquid volumes in the infant without PKU at this stage, you can see that there is a large nutritional gap. Total protein intake is insufficient to meet total protein needs, with an additional about 10 grams of protein needed a day. Additionally, with this intake alone, micronutrients and essential fatty acids such as DHA and AA are provided in insufficient amounts. So how can we close this nutritional gap and still maintain metabolic stability? Well, historically, one way to achieve this has been to increase the volume of fee-free infant formula. But doing this doesn't come without consequences, including impacts on appetite, a backstep in achieving developmental milestones, and a possible interference with weaning off the bottle. Another consideration to close this nutritional gap is to increase nutrients from a varied diet. But in reality, it's really not feasible to meet a full balance of a micronutrient intake and meet the increasing protein requirements of a PKU infant on a low protein diet alone. It really goes without saying there are some common challenges that are unique to infants with PKU and their caregivers. First of all, the restrictive nature of the PKU diet may result in prolonged reliance on large volumes of PKU infant formula, well beyond what's typical for this age. At a time when most infants are reducing their liquid volume intake, closing the nutritional gap with more liquid volume is really a backstep in meeting developmental milestones. Another challenge is the impact large volumes can have on appetite for solid foods. Again, really delaying that natural and age-appropriate progression from a mostly liquid diet to a varied diet coming from solid foods. And finally, this unique challenge to PKU, in which we want to really strike that balance between the development of oromotor and self-feeding skills while simultaneously supporting adequate growth and achieving metabolic control. So let's now revisit the approximate nutrient intake during introduction of solids at around 6 months of age. I want to really highlight here the infant with PKU and how we can close this nutritional gap. Well, we can really successfully close this nutritional gap with 2 packets of PKU Explore 5, which is a specially formulated fee-free semi-solid that can be utilized to meet the increasing nutrition needs without an excessive volume of fee-free infant formula that needs to be consumed. So what is PKU Explore? Well, PKU Explore is an amino acid-based semi-solid or spoonable fee-free medical food that's suitable from 6 months of age. It is specifically designed to support the introduction of solids, and it fits in really well as a first food for babies with PKU. It contains a full range of micronutrients, and it really helps support a baby and caregiver-centered approach to the introduction of solid foods tailored for PKU. I want to show you now a little bit more about how to mix and prepare PKU Explore. So, PKU Explore for infants comes in packets that contain 5 grams of protein equivalents each. You mix each packet with 1 tablespoon of water to then make 4 teaspoons of a prepared formula. I think you can really see nicely in this picture here how low volume and spoonable PKU Explore 5 really is. I want to dive a little bit more into the role PKU Explore can really play in the introduction to solids in our PKU babies. First of all, it really helps to meet the growing protein needs of PKU infants without increasing the volume of fee-free infant formula. Second, it provides a concentrated source of protein equivalents and micronutrients, which simply cannot be provided by protein-rich foods due to the protein-restricted nature of the PKU diet. Third, it really helps support age-appropriate feeding by reducing the volume of liquid intake and allowing an appetite for solid foods. So less filling up on liquid volume, leading to greater likelihood of accepting an increased amount of solid food intake. Finally, it can really alleviate parental anxiety with helping achieve those nutritional and developmental milestones for their infant. I want to go ahead now and walk us through how to use PKU Explore in clinical practice. So I'm now going to introduce you to our case report today. This is a baby girl that was diagnosed with PKU on newborn screening. She was started on fee-free infant formula on her 5th day of life. She did initially receive breast milk as her intact protein source, but then she transitioned to standard infant formula due to mom's low breast milk supply. She was started on sapropterin dihydrochloride at 3 months of age. And while she was not a huge responder in terms of increasing her intact protein tolerance, it did help with Phe level stability. So we thought it was worthwhile to continue that for her. And overall, she had really good Phe control for her first 5 months of life. So in my clinic, I really like to set my families up for solid success. And so we like to schedule a clinic appointment at 4 months before solids are even started. This is when we like to really start that introduction to solids discussion. You know, this can be a really overwhelming time for parents and caregivers, and I find that starting the discussion early on can really help alleviate some of those anxieties. We're going to go into more detail throughout the rest of this presentation about the components of this particular clinic visit, but I do want to just provide you with a brief overview of topics that are discussed at this 4-month clinic appointment. So first of all, we explained the simplified diet. We really discussed PKU Explore and how to introduce it with solids. We started that discussion early about introducing a cup at this key developmental stage. We discussed behavioral nutrition therapy. We, of course, answered a ton of questions, and there were more questions following the clinic appointment. So lots of questions, and of course, reducing that anxiety and reassuring the parents that everything's going to be okay as we transition to this next stage of solid food introduction. This is a plugin for behavioral nutrition therapy. So this is something that we utilize in our metabolic clinic and that we do educate our families on early to help promote favorable eating and mealtime experiences. I really like to bring it up along with the starting solids discussion. I think it sets the stage for introducing solids, so it's a really great time to bring it up. The general concept of behavioral nutrition therapy is that it aims to praise children for good behavior with lots of positive attention, and it ignores misbehaviors by not giving any negative attention to them. So, you know, kids are really smart and they quickly realize that attention is attention, even if it's negative attention for misbehaviors. So this is how I educated our family on using behavioral nutrition therapy in their home. I really shared how it works in practice. So I told them anytime you see good behaviors at eating times, such as trying a new bite of food, staying seated during a meal, finishing a portion of food, we instructed them to give lots of positive attention and praise. So saying things like, wow, eating those mashed potatoes is going to make you so strong. Or thank you so much for sitting with us tonight at the dinner table. We loved having you here tonight. And so really reinforcing that positive behavior and positive attention. Now, on the flip side, behaviors that are misbehaviors, such as refusing to eat, throwing food on the floor, only trying little baby small amounts of something, preferring to play with toys or siblings during mealtime. We instructed the parents to simply ignore. So instead of saying something like, hey, please stop playing and come eat your food, or if you just eat 3 more bites, you can have dessert, we instructed our family to just be completely neutral. And very quickly, what happens is the child realizes they're getting lots of attention with good behaviors, but none with misbehaviors. And it helps kind of extinct those misbehaviors. Truly, truly, if the entire family is on board, this approach works like magic. It does take a lot of patience, but it's really a nice way to set up really wonderful eating patterns and mealtime experiences for the family. So now going back to our case report at 6 months, it's now time to start solids. So similar to an infant without PKU, we want to get started around this 6-month mark. And we want to start with 1 to 2 structured meals with solids offered per day. We then instructed the parents to offer 1 to 2 spoonfuls or teaspoons, which is about 1.25 grams of protein equivalents of PKU Explore 5 before every solid feed. So this really starts getting the infant used to having fee-free medical food offered in a form other than liquid at routine and expected times. So we instructed the parents after the PKU Explore is offered, then you provide uncounted or 0-gram protein foods. This is really a time to just allow the baby to get used to new tastes and textures from solids. And it's really helpful to introduce uncounted or 0-gram protein foods first to help reduce parental anxiety. So like I mentioned earlier, this can be a really overwhelming time for parents, and especially when they're also thinking about the PKU in addition to starting solids. Things like, how am I going to count protein? How is this going to potentially affect Phe levels? So what we find is by starting first with just uncounted or 0-gram protein foods from solids, this takes some pressure off and it just allows the baby to start exploring solids. So it's a really, really nice way to get started. We then instructed the parents that during this time, you should maintain the same amount of liquids. So the same amount of standard infant formula and the same amount of fee-free infant formula. So nothing changed with that prescription at this juncture. And of course, we encouraged water in a cup to start encouraging that developmental milestone at this time as well. So this approach to starting solids works really well with the simplified diet method for PKU. We provided our family with a list of uncounted fruits and uncounted vegetables that are in alignment with the simplified diet. And, I really provided the family with this handout that includes all of these uncounted fruits and uncounted vegetables. And I really emphasized just how many options there are on this list, how much variety there is, how the base of the PKU diet is really rich in so many nutritious fruits and vegetables, including so much color and fiber. And I think this is a really nice way to frame it for families. I think oftentimes they express a lot of worry about what is my child going to actually be able to eat? And it's a nice way to show them how many options they will have and how much variety there is. So this is the section of the handout that we provided this family, really emphasizing those uncounted fruits and uncounted vegetables they could get creative with and really expose their baby to. So throughout the first year, I really like to encourage families to explore different textures throughout their solid food introduction journey. A lot of this progression will likely be driven by parental preference. So some may prefer more of a baby-led weaning approach in which finger foods are provided right away. Others may prefer a more traditional approach where they start with purees and work their way up. And then some parents may actually want to do a little bit of a combination of the two. And we can totally support this with our first food introduction for PKU. So on this slide, I just really wanted to highlight some of this more traditional approach, starting with purees or stage 1 to 2 foods. So this can be homemade purees by the family, like a homemade applesauce, or it can be those ready-to-feed foods like a jarred baby food or a pouch. I know my patients just can't get enough of the pouches. And then moving on to more of a salsa style, so those stage 2 to 3 foods where they're still soft and skinless, but they're chopped up in a small fashion. Can be nice to chop up peaches, or some like steamed carrots is really nice. Then moving on to more of a pico de gallo style. So those are the stage 3+ foods, where you're then thinking about still providing soft foods, but skins may be included, and they can be chopped up in a little bit larger style, so more of a small to medium chop. So thinking about maybe a pear that contains the skin still, but it's chopped up in a small, medium chop fashion can be a nice idea. And then moving on to those finger foods. So where there's skins on, there's larger pieces, and the baby is really grasping those larger pieces of the foods. So here we have our cases intake at 6 to 7 months with that introduction of solids. And let's take a little bit of a deeper look here. So you see she was taking 20 ounces of fee-free infant formula, 3 spoonfuls of PKU Explore 5, 8 ounces of standard infant formula, and she was getting 2 meals a day with solids that had 0 grams of counted protein. Her total liquid volume intake was 28 ounces, which I do want to note is on the low end of target liquid intake for age. Typically at this age, we see liquid intakes ranging from about 28 to 34 ounces a day. So she's definitely on the low end of that range, but she was growing really well and had really good metabolic stability. So this was an appropriate intake for her. What you can see also at this juncture is that her total protein needs were met and in alignment with the GMDI CERN PKU guidelines. And this was all with the addition of the PKU Explore 5 into her routine. So after a successful initial introduction of solids, it was time to advance solids and really take things to the next level at around 7 months. So the parents had started getting their feet wet with introducing uncounted solid foods and the PKU Explore 5. And so now it was time to instruct the parents to increase to 3 structured meals a day with solids, to continue to offer 1 to 2 spoonfuls of PKU Explore 5 before each of those solid feeds, and then to start adding in counted protein foods. So we advised the parents to aim for half to 1 gram of counted protein from foods at each meal. And we then instructed the parents to decrease the amount of standard infant formula from her prescription by 1 ounce for every half gram of protein eaten. So basically, if she ate 1 gram of protein at breakfast, parents would then remove 2 ounces of standard infant formula from her daily total. And this is a really nice, simple way for parents to get used to counting protein from foods and decreasing the intact source of liquid protein accordingly. We also instructed parents at this time to continue to allow the baby to have any additional uncounted or 0 gram protein foods she desired. This is a really nice way for babies to learn their own kind of hunger and fullness cues, which I think is wonderful. And we advise a lot of times to first offer the counted protein foods and then offer additional uncounted or 0 gram protein foods, just to really try to encourage the infant to intake those counted protein foods first before they fill up on a bunch of uncounted or 0 gram protein foods. And finally, we encouraged the family to replace her lunch bottle with a cup. So a pro tip here for bottle weaning is to really start with removing the bottles that are provided at meals first. And this is just kind of a little tip and trick for helping support bottle to cup weaning. So at this time, now that the family's starting counted protein from foods, a greater variety of foods can be introduced, which is a really exciting time for the families. So this includes things like starches and grains. I really find that a lot of our PKU families are looking for ideas of types of foods that they can provide their infants. So I want to walk through some examples today. Again, really encouraging those different textures and food varieties. So at that 5 to 7 month mark, if you're kind of doing a more traditional approach, starting with mashed foods, so maybe a low protein hot cereal or mashed starchy veggies like a mashed potato. Then moving on in the 7 to 9 month area with things that are more similar to a rice shape and texture, so maybe soft cooked small low protein pastas or low protein rices, soft and skinless small chopped starchy veggies. So again, introducing that different form of the vegetable. So if you started with mashed potato, trying to maybe chop it up small, still skinless, and provide it to the baby that way. Then transitioning to more macaroni type shapes and sizes. So low protein cooked noodles, pieces of low protein breads or gluten-free waffles, maybe including skins on some of the chopped starchy veggies that are more of a small to medium chop. Thinking about things like low protein tortillas can be exciting and new. And then moving on to more of a French fry style. I think we all know our patients love French fries. So also thinking of things like larger pieces of low protein breads, keeping skins on starchy vegetables and making them kind of that larger French fry size, and then adding sauces. It's a really great time to add different spices and different sauces and to mix things up and expose the infant to a lot of different flavors. There's also considerations for adding in dairy and meat alternatives as some of the counted protein foods. So thinking about some of the alternative dairy-based yogurts like unsweetened coconut yogurt or mashed avocado is a great idea. Then moving on to more of like a scrambled egg style. So thinking of things like low protein scrambled eggs or more of avocado chunks. A lot of my PKU patients really love low protein cheese shreds or pieces that they can pick up. And that's kind of a fun food adventure for them. Moving on then to more of like a hamburger style, so maybe utilizing a low protein ground meat, or maybe making low protein grilled cheese sandwich bites using low protein bread with a low protein cheese. That can be super fun. And then thinking forward to more of like a nuggets style, so considering like a low protein chicken nugget alternative, maybe making low protein quesadilla slices, again with a low protein tortilla and that low protein cheese, maybe sneaking in some uncounted veggies in there. And then thinking forward about a low protein milk alternative like a rice milk or a coconut milk or an almond milk that's fortified in calcium and vitamin D. It can also be a fun time to start thinking about treats like a coconut milk ice cream or a rice milk ice cream. That could be fun to include as well. So now coming back to our case again, we have hit a common roadblock. So the parents reported that the baby was not very into eating solids. They reported that they had just tried everything to get her to eat more, and they really didn't know what to do. I think that a lot of people on this webinar today can agree that this sounds very familiar. So I spoke to the parents, and what we did is we obtained a 24-hour recall. And what it really revealed is that the meals and the solids were being offered soon after a liquid formula feed was given to the baby. So my suspicion was that the baby was filling up on tons of liquid volume, and then when solid foods were presented to her, she just simply wasn't hungry for them. So together with the parents, we created a feeding schedule to promote solid food intake. What we did is we adjusted things so that her morning bottle was at 6:30 a.m., where she got 50-50 of standard infant formula and fee-free infant formula. Then we pushed her breakfast to 10 a.m., when she then was more likely to have an appetite for eating solids. Previously, the parents were kind of aiming for like a 7:30 a.m. feeding for breakfast, and it just wasn't working out for this baby. So we pushed it back a little bit, which worked for their schedule. And we advised, of course, to start with the offering of the 1 to 2 spoonfuls of PKU Explore 5. Then to offer her a 1/2 to 1 gram of protein from solid foods. Then to finish the meal with the bottle. So the bottle would then contain amounts of standard infant formula depending on protein from food intake at that meal. And then it would be complete with 2 to 3 ounces of fee-free infant formula to satisfy her hunger. And just manipulating the schedule a little bit and working with the parents on something that was practical for them to actually put into action worked really well for the parents, and it worked really well in terms of kind of getting that appetite up for the baby. So now looking at our case's intake between 7 to 9 months. So you can see here that her fee-free infant formula intake was unchanged. So she still was taking in 20 ounces a day. Her PKU Explore 5 intake naturally increased with her increase to 3 meals a day. Her standard infant formula intake decreased by about half with her increase in counted protein foods from solids. And this led to an overall total decrease in liquid volume intake from 28 to 24 ounces a day. Again, this total volume intake was a little bit on the low end of target intake for age, but similarly to how I mentioned earlier, she was really growing wonderfully with wonderful fee level control, and so this intake was appropriate for her. As you can see on the bottom, her total protein intake meets the high end of estimated total protein needs when compared to guidelines, and this again really maintained her metabolic stability. So the next step was to increase solid food intake even further at the 9-month mark. So we instructed the parents to continue providing 3 structured meals a day, and then to add in now 1 to 2 snacks with solids a day. We also instructed the parents to increase the amount of PKU Explore 5 offered at meals from 1 to 2 spoonfuls to 2 to 3 spoonfuls before every meal. So keeping up with those increasing fee-free protein equivalent needs. And then along with the addition of the 1 to 2 snacks a day, we were advising the parents to start working on an increase in counted protein coming from solids. So now instructing the parents to continue to give her 0.5 to 1 gram of protein from solids at each meal, but then to also offer 0 to 0.5 gram of counted protein at snacks. We continued to instruct parents to decrease the standard infant formula by 1 ounce for every 0.5 gram of protein eaten, and to continue to allow additional uncounted or 0 gram protein foods as desired. Finally, we worked on replacing more bottles at mealtimes with cups, and so now replacing both the breakfast and the lunch bottle with a cup. So now we see here her intake between 9 to 12 months. So you can see with the increase in PKU Explore 5 intake, her fee-free infant formula intake naturally decreased by 4 ounces. Her standard infant formula intake decreased again by half to just 2 ounces a day, with that increase in counted protein from solid food intake at 4 feeds a day. So she was getting 3 meals and 1 snack. And a total liquid volume intake decrease overall to 18 ounces a day. I want to highlight again that even throughout all these transitions with the natural decrease in her fee-free infant formula intake, her increase of PKU Explore 5, her increase of counted protein from solids, she was still meeting her total protein intake in comparison to guidelines during this transition. So here's a snapshot of this patient's Phe levels throughout the first 10 months. Of course, you can initially see the large spike on diagnosis and then an overall trend down towards target range. Overall, her Phe levels were in goal range throughout this 10 months of life. I just want to point out at month 3, where there's the bright blue dot. This is before we started solids or PKU Explore 5. She did start sapropterin at that time, and you can see that it did help with a little bit of Phe level stability. Then highlighting where there's the gray dot at month 6. So this was right when we were gearing up to start solids and start the PKU Explore 5. You do see a few upticks in levels above target range. She was teething during this time, and that's not uncommon to see. But really pointing out that with that transition to starting solids and initiating the PKU Explore 5, between months 6 and 9, really great overall blood Phe control in that goal range. And then highlighting at month 9, where there's the navy blue dot, again, we kind of were working a lot on that increase in counted protein from foods and that increase in PKU Explore 5, and we were still able to really successfully maintain metabolic stability. So now here's a little update on this case. She is now a toddler at 17 months old. She has fully transitioned off of standard infant formula, and she gets 3 grams of counted protein from foods a day. So this is broken down into 3 structured meals and 1 to 2 snacks, where she continues to follow that same pattern that she did as an infant, with 0.5 to 1 gram of protein offered at meals and 0 to 0.5 gram protein at her snacks. We did have to really work with her parents and with her daycare to modify her meal and snack patterns because she transitioned from being at home full time to then going to daycare full time. And so we did need to make a few adjustments with her patterns, but this was really easy to do, along with a lot of collaboration with the parents and the daycare. She is continuing to take her PKU Explore 5. She now takes 2 full packets a day to give her 10 grams of protein equivalents total. She loves her PKU Explore 5. We are thinking about switching her to PKU Explore 10 down the line. It does have a different flavor profile for toddlers. And so if we need to increase protein equivalents in her diet further at any time in the near future, I think we're going to consider making that switch. And this is going to be a really nice way to do so. We're also starting to think about that transition to the stage 2 fee-free formula. And so initially we are thinking about the switch to PKU Trio, and first starting with mixing some of the PKU Trio into her breakfast and lunch cups of fee-free infant formula so that she can just start getting used to a new taste and really trying to promote that taste acceptance. And then working on that bedtime bottle, which I think we all know tends to be the one that's hardest to let go of. So then mixing 2 scoops of PKU Trio and 4 ounces of fee-free infant formula in that bedtime bottle to try to smoothly work off of 100% of those bottles, including the bedtime bottle and the fee-free infant formula, and taking all liquids from a cup. I'm going to wrap up this portion of the webinar by just sharing this parent's experience with PKU Explore. They shared these quotes with us, and I just have to share them today. So first of all, they say, "We just love PKU Explore." They truly do. They said, "Our daughter has liked and accepted PKU Explore from the beginning. She expects it before her meals and usually takes it without any problems." For a metabolic dietitian, that's just a huge win and makes me so happy. And they also said, "We like that she's getting used to a PKU formula other than her PKU infant formula early on. We feel like we're preparing her to be a PKU toddler, which is very comforting to us." And so I just find these sorts of parent experiences so inspiring and super valuable for us to hear as clinicians. So now I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to the VitaFlow team, and then we'll join again for a Q&A in a little bit. Thank you.
Thanks, Chanel. That was a great presentation and really well provided. So as Lisabetta mentioned at the top of the hour, my name is Maria Ortego, and I am here today and happy to join you all to share a few exciting new VitaFlow resources that we hope will not only help you with your day-to-day work, but also help you in communicating these PKU formula transitions to your patient families. And all of the resources that I'm going to go over in the next few minutes are available on the VIA portion of our website. So if you'll take a peek at the slide, you'll see that the image on the left is a mock-up of a healthcare provider handout that we have created, which is a clear and interactive timeline of taking the patient and their caretakers on the VitaFlow for Life journey. So the goal of our development of this piece is that it's a one-stop shop for you all with all the tools, information, and resources that you might need for each of these products, PKU Start, PKU Explore, and PKU Trio, that are involved in PKU formula transitioning. So when you get in front of this piece, it'll be a little bit bigger and it'll make some more sense, but The interactive portion is really nice. So when you click on the can or when you click on the calculator, it'll take you directly to that resource. Similarly, the image on the right is the companion caretaker piece. So as Chanel was mentioning in the 4-month appointment of kind of explaining the transitioning journey, we've created this document for you to share with your caretakers that allows them to follow along on the same journey that you're going on the left, just without all the technical healthcare professional specific information on them. And so the nice part about that is it provides them with a roadmap of what to expect during some of those anxious feeding transition times. Our next resource is our updated PKU transition calculator. And this is a comprehensive tool that's provided in Excel format. And again, I know it's a little bit small on the screen, but there are 4 tabs on the bottom that provide quick and clear calculations for transitioning your patient from PKU start. You're also able to use this with other PKU infant formulas to PKU trio, our second stage formula. If you'll look on the left there is an icon that'll zoom out in a moment, but there's even a video tutorial available if you're more of an auditory learner. It's embedded in the actual document itself. On the next tab, you'll see the how-to guide, which is all the written instructions, very comprehensive of how to use the calculator for you visual learners who like to read all the instructions before you dive in. And then for you tactile learners who prefer to just do and jump into the calculator, the transition calculator is there on the 3rd tab and provides guidance on where and what it needs to output the calculations for you. So we hope that this tool will help you transition your infants to PKU trio quite seamlessly. Additionally, we have a printable caretaker handout, which will provide the quantities and changes of formula throughout each step of the transition. There's even a space for adding the PKU Explore recommendations. And overall, connecting with your territory manager at the beginning of this process to get your samples ahead of time is always a great idea. So contact your territory manager for more information about getting the samples at the beginning of this transition, and if you have any other questions about these resources. And now I'll hand it back to Elisaveta for your questions.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you, Chanel. Let's back out of here. There you are. Okay, so it's time for our question and answer portion. Let me turn my video on here as well. And we do have some questions in, so I will actually start them out of order because we just covered some educational resources, and Beth on here is actually inquiring about the availability of accessible, user-friendly education on this topic for PKU parents. She's sharing that this is great information and parents would benefit from this type of more in-depth information on starting solids for PKU infants. And this may not be possible necessarily at the clinic visit appointments. So I wondered first, Chanel and Suzanne, is there anything particular that you use? Or is there a room for us to develop something that would fill that gap if there is one?
So we typically have, that's why we set aside kind of that 4-month appointment, so we can dedicate the majority of that clinic appointment to having a lot of these discussions with our families, and kind of, you know, we end up spending, I think, a lot of time outside of clinic appointments as well, with having phone conversations and email conversations to help guide them through this process of starting solids. I do think that it's a wonderful suggestion that if there was maybe a video for families to watch that clinics could refer them to help guide them as additional supplementation to the information the clinic is providing, I think that could be really fantastic, because clinic visits are busy, and it's not just the metabolic dietitian who has
conversations to have with the family, right? You oftentimes have a physician, a nurse, or a nurse practitioner. And so there's a lot of conversations that are going on. And so I definitely think that it might be helpful to have supplemental videos that can be viewed outside of the clinic appointment.
Suzanne?
I think also like with food introduction and feeding young kids, often what we're really getting asked for isn't only specific nutrition or low protein food advice, but parenting advice. And so, like, if your clinic has a social worker who can direct a family to resources, that's wonderful. I also know like different hospitals and especially children's hospitals might have some like young parenting resources. We really like to empower our families to seek resources that are in the community with the understanding that sometimes the specific food recommendations might not fit their child, and that like have that as like an open dialogue with the clinic.
So it sounds like we might have a next project.
There could
Okay.
definitely be something more specific for PKU.
Okay, great. This is actually another question about resources. So Stephanie is asking if there are any handouts that you can share on the behavioral nutrition therapy.
So Suzanne originally created the behavioral nutrition therapy handout that we are using at UCLA. With Suzanne's permission, I think, we may be pretty open to sharing that and allowing other clinics to use that as a starting point for the discussion with their families.
I certainly have my permission. I also think it's a great starting point to be able to talk with families and just make sure they understand like if it works for their family and their child's PKU is well controlled, like it works. So like it's one approach to approaching meal times that's almost sort of meant to train families just to foster that positive eating environment, which I think some families do very naturally and others maybe need a little more instruction with.
I needed that for sure.
A lot
We
of our
all do
families
sometimes.
a lot of our families tell us that they have the behavioral nutrition handout on their fridge. Like it's posted up on their fridge so that, everyone in the family is on board with this kind of eating style. Yeah.
And that's really important, actually. And you
Mhm.
mentioned that in your presentation, that everybody has to be on the same page. And if
Yes.
they're not, then it's probably not going to work very well.
Everyone has to be on the same page. If you have different caregivers involved, like maybe grandparents involved, again, kids are super smart. So they realize that maybe what they're getting away with their grandparents is different from what they can get away with their own parents. And so the whole family really has to be involved. Yeah.
That's excellent. Okay. Clarice would like to know, how would you adjust for patients who are breastfeeding as we start counted protein foods?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So this requires, a lot of coordination, again, with the family and especially the breastfeeding mom. What we have done is remove breastfeeding sessions as increase in counted protein is taken by the baby. It's going to be dissimilar from being able to know the exact amount that you're going to be removing from a bottle, right, of standard infant formula, because we don't know with breastfeeding at the breast exactly how much Phe or counted protein they're getting, okay? But especially in this infant stage, when we're testing Phe levels most of the time weekly, you're doing a lot of monitoring and just removing breastfeeds or adding breastfeeding sessions in response to the amount of intact protein or counted protein that the baby is taking by mouth.
Yeah, and I think we do it similarly, but we actually recommend an amount of counted protein that's offered per meal. And we don't ever ask the family to count what the baby takes because I think that's also very hard to quantify at this stage. And then again, with really diligent weekly monitoring, we're typically able to see when there's a rise, like either an actual elevation or an uptick in the Phe level, and then respond once we see that. So we actually do that both with bottle fed and breastfed babies. We don't typically remove it before they take it because it's just too hard for the family to know what the child's actually going to take in at this point.
The next question is, do you always have family count grams of protein versus milligrams of feed?
That's another really good question. So I'll say that the majority of our families count grams of protein, okay? But you can still do this approach with counting milligrams of feed. So, if a family prefers to count milligrams of feed, or if for a reason, like clinically, you feel it's indicated to count milligrams of feed instead of grams of protein, this method still can support that easily.
So Chanel, if I can just tease that out a little bit
Yeah.
more, is it more the driving force of how you do this? Is it more the family's preference, or is it how severe the PKU is, or a combination of both?
It's I guess it's a combination of, it could be a combination of both. I think for most of our families, they prefer to count grams of protein instead of count milligrams of feed. So we tend to support that for most of our families. But, I have had just a small handful of families who do prefer to count milligrams of feed. And so we've, supported that. Or, I haven't been in this situation at this point in my career, but I could see if there was a point in which things were, really difficult to metabolically control, and counting grams of protein was not working out for that family, to suggest that we maybe try counting milligrams of feed instead. I don't know, Suzanne, if you've had that experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think the kind of limited data out there shows that like statistically they're equal, but like every patient's an individual. So, and every family. So like, I think we tend to do it based on family preference. Again, most families lean toward grams of protein, just because I think they find that they're able to access that information so readily, and other caregivers are as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
That they tend to lean on that approach. Can use the same strategies regardless of what counting method's being used.
Yeah, and to tack on to that, a thing I kind of like to talk with families about as well is, as their kids get older and start entering the school age years, I think it's nice for the kids to be able to count grams of protein. I think it's a little bit more tangible for them to learn about how to count protein to manage their PKU than it is to be counting milligrams of feed of everything.
So it gives kids early on more ownership, really, of their life.
I think so. Yes, I think so.
Okay, this is a pretty good question. Do you find yourself often needing to add additional multivitamin mineral supplements once they are transitioned off the standard infant formula, more so meet the mineral DRIs?
I don't typically find that's the case by the time they're transitioned to a stage 2 formula. And then also the PKU Explore contains a pretty good range of vitamins and minerals as well to help cover those gaps.
So we have Zazil, hi again, and a comment from Beth. So Zazil, my question for how long has the mother breastfed a PKU baby? For how long has the mother breastfed? I suppose this is for the case maybe that you covered, or maybe on
in
average.
this case, I believe the mom went to about 3 months, few months, yeah, where she was able to breastfeed, and then the supply was quite low. She went back to work, and so we ended up utilizing the standard infant formula.
Okay. And then Beth again is just saying that she would love the handout that you use. So perhaps we can facilitate even getting that to her in our follow-up conversation.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. We're at time, but I have this question and I just kind of want to put it out and see where it leads. I just wondered, because I'm making an assumption here that maybe you haven't always used the simplified diet, maybe when you first started in your practice, maybe you brought it on later, or maybe you weren't always using PKU Explore. So once you started employing some of these more newish practices, what would you say was a big maybe aha, or anything that really significantly impacted positively your care for families, for caretakers, for the PKU babies?
So Suzanne is actually going to have to answer this, because Suzanne is my mentor. And when I started, I learned simplified diet, and this complete method that I spoke about today on this webinar, I learned from Suzanne. So if Suzanne has, kind of her experience, that would be her question to answer.
That's an honor to hear, but like, I think over time, like working with families with PKU, like the greatest lesson I've learned is every family's different. Like we said before, if PKU is well managed and it works for the family, it works for us. Like, so it's not about like a one size fits all approach. And so I think really all these things are about having as many different methods in your tool belt as you can, and meeting the family where they are, and with whatever educational strategies work for them, whatever formulas work for them. But I shared this earlier, but we had a family just this week that had over the last few weeks has had a toddler who's on a liquid formula strike, but this toddler also takes PKU Explore. And so the family has been able to, in a low stress way, lean more heavily on her PKU Explore. And I think their staying low stress about it has made the whole situation a little bit easier to handle for both the young toddler and the family, certainly for me as the dietitian, knowing they have this. But I think we're all just like working toward the same goal with families. And so these are all wonderful tools to have to help families.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, having backup plans for the backup plan. So more tools is great. Great, ladies. Well, I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much. And thank you for all of you guys who joined us last week and this week, and anyone here that's new. So as promised, you will definitely get the handouts and maybe some additional handouts after this session. And also, once we close out the webinar, an evaluation will pop up. So please take a few moments. It's just 8 questions. So just take the time to fill that out and give us your feedback, because it's really helpful, good or bad, to help us improve, or just it's encouraging to our speakers for us. So please take the time to do that. And it helps us identify other gaps in terms of what other education or insights we can be bringing to the community to all do better. So thank you all on behalf of VIA, VitaFlow, in association with you. We hope that you found this information helpful, and have a great day.
Thank you.